Welcome everyone. It's great to have you here. I think you've already had the scene set somewhat today. A number of our speakers in the plenary session have talked about the issue of food waste. Obviously we've got the second seminar on shortly around Australian food waste. We're going to try and set the global setting here. To begin with, we're going to hear from Mark Barthel, who recently joined us at the Fight Food Waste CRC, and Mark's a global expert in food waste. I've just realised I actually forgot to introduce myself as well. My name's Steve Lapidge. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Fight Food Waste Cooperative Research Centre. So I'm going to hand over to Mark, and he's really going to set the scene, and then we're going to ask some hard questions. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Morning, everyone. Let's wait for the slides to come up. Here we go. So one of the things we were trying to do when we first started getting into looking at food loss and waste around the world was trying to find a way of characterising it, trying to find a way of normalising it for people. And we decided one of the best ways of doing that was to characterise food loss and waste as a country. And you can see from this, if global food waste was a country, it would be consuming 32% of all the food on the planet by weight. It will be consuming about 25% of all the water used in agriculture worldwide, and it would be responsible for consuming 1 in 4 of all calories produced on the planet. And it would also be the third largest carbon emitter after the USA and China. So 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions are embedded within global food loss and waste. And it would be utilising a cropland area the size of China. So this is a pretty large landmass being wasted at the moment. How does it play out in terms of by region? You can see at the bottom here that on the left-hand side for North America and Oceania, we're looking at around a 42% loss and wastage of food. And you can see by the colour bars where that is occurring. So if you look across the countries and regions here represented on this chart, you'll see that generally speaking in the developing world, you see more of the loss and the waste in primary production and primary processing, whereas if we move through emerging economies and regions in the world to the developed world, it tends to happen more at the consumption side of food, so in wholesale retail and in homes, in people's homes. Sorry, let me just... And it's a very systematic thing as well. So a very simple interaction between one part of a food value chain and another can affect the amount of food that's lost or wasted. And I'll give you a very quick example, as I'm conscious of time. So working in the UK with the potato production industry and the potato production chain, one of the things that we rapidly realised was that no one really understood why in the UK someone thought the perfect circumference of a potato would be 45 millimetres. We just didn't know where that had come from. We traced it back to a product specification in 1978, and no one could tell us why that had been set and why potatoes were graded out and lost as a result. We reduced the screens in the packaging houses by just 2 millimetres. That increased the utilisation of the crop on farm by 5%, which gave the potato farmer £1,000 more per hectare. So a simple interaction between one end of the value chain and the other can have a very significant difference in the amount of food loss and waste. And tackling food waste, as you have heard from John Carey and others already today, is really important in the context of what we call the perfect storm. So by 2030, we're looking at increased energy demand of 50%. We're looking at increased demand for water at around 30%. And we're looking at increased demand for food of around 40 to 50%, certainly 60% by 2050. So there's a demand for more. We have a growing population. We also have a growing middle class, and by 2050, somewhere between a half and 2/3 of the planet will be classed as middle-income families. So we have a great expectation there as well around a dietary shift. People wanting to move out of just grains and very simple diets into a more balanced diet, more fruit and veg, more perishable food, more meat, poultry, fish, and so on. And this is quite a challenge in a lot of countries where the infrastructure simply isn't there. Increasing level of urbanisation as well around the world will cause us problems as we disconnect some of the food value chain and the supply chain from centres of population. So this is something we need to think about a lot more alleviating poverty and climate risks we've already heard lots about today. Climate risks to the food system need to be better managed, and tackling food loss and waste is one very good way of doing that. So we have, as you've heard already today, the SDGs, 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and within SDG 12 on consumption and production, we have a specific target to halve per capita global food waste at retail and consumer levels, and to reduce food losses along the production and supply chains, including post-harvest losses. And you'll see from the diagram at the bottom right there that Australia is one of those countries that has signed up to a target that's completely aligned with SDG target 12.3. So Australia needs to halve food loss and waste by 2030, according to the government strategy. It is a problem, and if we're not careful in a business as usual scenario, we will see food waste and loss go up. The Boston Consulting Group in the States think this will be somewhere around 30% in a business as usual scenario, so we can't afford for that to happen. But it also presents us with a $1 trillion Australian dollar opportunity by looking at all these different things. So raising awareness of food waste, improving supply chain infrastructure and supply chain efficiency. Collaboration is going to be absolutely key from farm to fork. And the policy environment, what policy levers can we use in government to improve the situation? And the business case is really good to tackle this. So if you're a business looking at preventing food waste, and this is from a study by a group called Champions 12.3, they have done analysis of 1,200 sites in 200 companies and 17 countries. And the average return on investment for every dollar you spend to prevent food waste, you get 14 back. Now, in the food industry, that is unbelievable return on investment. So a really good opportunity to tackle food waste and to actually make money from doing it. There are many solutions to tackling food waste. I won't go into all of them there, but you can see from tackling confusion around date labeling on food to improving demand and supply chains, the efficiency of those, and even in our homes, planning ahead before we shop, buying what we need, cooking the right amount, and all of that. So very basic home economics behaviours. We can have a massive impact on food loss and waste. And then finally, this is from the kind of the policy levers that we can deploy. So the starting point for any program of food loss and waste is actually understanding how much food we are wasting. Without that sort of information, not just the volume, but the composition of the food waste, what products are we wasting the most and why, that's a really critical part of building an evidence base that then industry and governments can work on. We have strategy and targets here, regulation. So in some countries, they've actually banned supermarkets from sending food that's fit for human consumption to landfill. And that's caused a great ripple effect up the supply chain to help reduce the amount of food that goes down that route. So we're increasing the amount of food rescue. We're looking at how we improve the value we get from food waste straight away, because you no longer have that route open to you. And I won't dwell on all the others, other than maybe saying voluntary commitments. I've been working on food loss and waste for 15 years, and every single country where I've seen a massive move in the dial is where government comes together in a public-private sector voluntary commitment and looks at tackling food waste. In the UK, to give you one example, over a 10-year time frame, we reduced avoidable food waste by nearly 30%. We saved 11 million tonnes of equivalent CO2 emissions, and we saved the consumer and food businesses £6.5 billion in 10 years. So we know it's achievable, we just need to bring it to more countries. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mark. And of course, this is the global food waste session, so we do have some global experts here, and so I'd like to introduce our other panel members. Firstly, Derk, and if you'd like to introduce yourself. Derk joins us from San Francisco, where he arrived this morning.
Yes, hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Derk, I'm the co-CEO of a company called Treasure8. We're based in San Francisco. The other co-CEO, there's two obviously, is also the founder of the company. His name is Timothy Childs. Treasure8 is a food tech company whose aim is to help solve the food waste crisis by turning it into value through superior drying technology. So our technology platform is a platform of drying technologies that helps to retain all the nutrients and energy that are contained in fresh agricultural product, and then turn it through upcycling partnerships into areas of value. So it's a partnership and technology platform that we express in 5 different areas right now: whole foods, proteins, hemp and cannabis, nutraceuticals, and bioplastics. So we look at everything that's in those waste streams, dry it, and through partnerships convert it into upcycled opportunities. I think you also asked us to share something that
What's
people
something
might
unique
not know.
that this audience may not know about you?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about that. It's hard because everything's on LinkedIn these days, but so I'm Dutch. I'm an ex-corporate guy who kind of lost its way for about 2 decades, but I grew up with fair trade and Greenpeace in my house and actively supporting it. And I also grew up playing rugby, and I coach my 9-year-old son in rugby today, and I thought that was appropriate for being here in Australia.
Thank you, Derk. Next, we're going to go to Pei Kang, who is joining us from Singapore.
Hi everyone, my name is Pei Kang. I'm from TRIA. So it's a company based in Singapore. We deal with footwear, and what we're able to do is a table-to-farm closed-loop approach to single-use food packaging. So how does this work? So imagine you're in KFC, with all the disposable food packaging that you have, cups, things like that. Okay, everything that is being thrown into the bin, okay, we will be able to take that waste, and valorize it into fertilizer in a 24-hour process. Okay, so this, let's just say, in Singapore, we did a brief math that we will be able to feed 2.5% of the population with vegetables from the fertilizer that we produce. So I think the key thing here is really about how do we close the loop? Because I think I'm sure many of you heard of materials, compostable materials. Are they eventually composted? We may have started off on the right track, but we are not really closing the loop in the right way. So what we intend to do is to properly close the loop so that it's something that is perpetually repeatable. This is an urban city solution. That pattern of consumerism is not going to change. I think this is something that we have to accept. Okay, and how do we keep pace with it through innovation and connecting the dots? I think this is really where we're coming from.
All right. Thank you, Pei Kang. Now, the first question, and I do want to tackle some hard questions in this panel. So, to the rest of the panel, globally, who is doing well in the fight against food waste and who is not? Mark, maybe you'd like to start with your UK perspective.
Thanks, Steve. I hate the naming and shaming piece. So I would say some of the leaders in food waste, I have to say the UK, because we've been doing it for 15 years and we're ahead of, I think, most countries, but also the Netherlands. So the work they're doing in the Netherlands on the research piece on food waste and also bringing companies together with government departments is groundbreaking. There are some aspects in North America as well. So some of the big retailers like Walmart's and Kroger are doing some really good work around zero waste, zero hunger programs. Who's not doing so well? Oh, God. Can I skip that one for a bit?
Yes, you can.
I'll have a think about it.
Dirk, what's happening in the US in terms of food waste at the moment?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Being Dutch and now having lived in the US for over a decade and just observing all of it, I think over-consumerism is just a huge problem. Portion sizes, all that kind of stuff, and that it's just very different in Europe than in the US. And I think, unfortunately, that over-consumption is kind of stimulated globally, so it's going the wrong way. And that doesn't have a lot to do with my own business, but I just observe that as a new citizen in a new country. I do think that part of the problem is by labeling food waste waste. Yep. And I do think we call it, we're working on a resource revolution. So we look at it as resources, as value that sits idle, right? one of the things that we're doing within our company is looking at food waste as a source of sequestered energy. Energy for people, that's nutrition and calories and what have you, but also energy for the machines that we're using to run our process in the first place, which is highly energy efficient, but it still needs energy. And then energy for the soil. So after all that entire process, the biochar that remains can be brought back into the soil, and you get into a regenerative system. So I think the question as in, who's doing it well, I think those who are applying a regenerative mindset to how we should deal with the planet that we are borrowing from our children, really, I think are doing it well. We happen to be funded, our company happens to be funded largely by a very cool Maori trust from New Zealand. And they have been applying regenerative principles to how they deal with their community. The quote, "We're borrowing the land from our children," comes from them. That's their philosophy. They never own it. They come here, they borrow it, they go back to where they came from. That's how they look at the flow of humanity. And I think that's how agriculture used to be run 300-400 years ago. We've just effed it up. And we haven't innovated. We're innovating everywhere except in the food system. We're still producing it with these huge plants that are destroying the planet, destroying social opportunities and social fabric. So I think that without being specific as to who does it right, those who have a regenerative mindset to solving the problem, I think are going somewhere.
Okay. Pei Kang, Singapore is a very efficient country. We would expect low levels of food waste in a country like Singapore. Is that the case? Or
I think there's a difference between pre-consumption and post-consumption.
Yep.
So you're right that in Singapore it's mostly on the consumption side of the waste. So and it's a tricky question, tricky topic to address because of the to some extent the lack of consistency in the waste. So Derk and I were just sharing that if Derk is interested to valorize the waste, it has to be consistent. Okay, that is production. That the yield needs to be consistent in order for it to be used. But the fact that it's post-consumption makes it a bit tricky. So I think Singapore is in a transition to do something about food waste. Food waste makes up around 10% of our total waste, and it's not really accounted for, in a way that it is just disposed, it is incinerated, after that it's passed to the landfill. So recently there's a Food Waste Act a Food Waste Standard that's been passed. It's a voluntary basis. So I think it is, if anything, it's more so providing a bit of kudos to the company who try to do a bit more with food waste. But I think good news in the next few years, in 2021, so Singapore is going to make it mandatory for public buildings, to separate out their food waste, so they can be taken to a biodigester plant, to be converted into biogas. Of course, this waste-to-energy approach, is very much, in the mindset of Singapore. And I think, of course, what our brown waste system is able to do, just to explain the brown waste system, we are able to take food waste, in this case, together with food packaging waste, and turn it into fertilizer. This is a rapid process. And I think in Singapore, speed is very important. We are a land-scarce country. We have not much of an island, to basically do outdoor composting or to have more landfill. So a fast in, fast out process seems to be the way. So I think that's somehow gravitating us towards a fast process to get rid of the waste. So yeah, I think largely speaking, it is about how we really sort out the consumption waste. Yeah.
So the elephant in the room, in one way, is these things either side of us. Sustainable Development Goal. Of course, we're talking about Goal 12.3, and that's 50% food waste reduction by 2030. Is that achievable? I mean, I work closely with the federal government, and it's certainly what we're committed to trying to achieve. But the reason I ask that is that countries like the Netherlands, who Mark mentioned before, who are world leaders in trying to address food waste, have been trying for 10 years, and they haven't been able to budge their per capita food waste creation, and because it's at such low levels to begin with. So can we achieve Sustainable Development Goal 12.3? And you can talk about different countries and different approaches, but can we achieve that big task, 50% food waste reduction by 2030? Let's go from yourself.
I think I'm not so sure in terms of the numbers, but I feel the mindset here is important. Are we coming from an optimization perspective, or are we here as an opportunity? Let me explain that. So there's this company called Sin Food Tech in Singapore. They basically take the leftover of soy production, soy whey. All right, they would what do you call it? They would ferment it and turn it into sake. Okay, so of course it's a high value good, and in this case I think the value addedness here is quite impressive. So I think if you come from that perspective, all right, of how we maximize the waste and really selling it off as another revenue stream, I think there is huge potential. Okay, at the end of the day, it's like Derk is right. Food waste cannot be taken as waste. Can we maximize it, valorize it? So from that perspective, I think it works better with the human psyche. I think we are, to some extent, there's a part of humans that's opportunistic. Okay, I think we tend to look more forward, all right, than to be constricted by what we can do. So I think from that perspective, there are opportunities.
Great. Derk, did you have? Do you think America will make?
Well, there's a thing that there's two quotes by me that I always use. One is, "There's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come," and I think we're at a tipping point.
Yep.
Given everything, the CEO roundtable, all those public statements, whether it comes from the right place or whether they're being coerced into it, doesn't really matter. I think from a tipping point perspective, we're there or getting there. And the other one is, perfection is the enemy of progress. So I think, yes, the goals are the goals, but we could have picked 75% or 25%. It's to some extent, it's arbitrary. In my experience, particularly in the corporate world, when you set a goal, it creates movement and momentum towards that goal. So personally, I'm not really interested if we're going to get to 50%, as long as there's meaningful progress towards it. Mm-hmm. That to me is a battle in action. On a day-to-day basis, we use the same approach. To manage our business, we use OKRs. When you set an OKR out, the expected level of delivery of an OKR is 50%, not 100, right? You can do better or you can do worse. I think if we look at it from that mindset, that's a good place to be. The key to get there, though, for me, and I don't know if this anticipates other questions or not, but is in collaboration and systems thinking. It's a massive system that is out there, and we have to solve all the parts to solve the entire thing. So applying a systems thinking mindset, a holistic mindset to the problem we're trying to solve, and then build an ecosystem of partnerships, whether that's NGOs or governments or private sector or all together. I would assume the answer is, to your point, all together. To get there. That, I think, is really critical. What does that mean for companies like ours? I just said we're building this technology platform, but I also use the word partnership platform. What I mean with that is at Treasure 8, yes, we have technology, it's proprietary, it's trademarked, all of that kind of good stuff. But there's also an ecosystem of partnerships that we're building, because we know that we cannot move the needle by ourselves. We need to design for scalability. So the systems thinking that we're deploying is both on the back end in terms of scaling our ability to source waste that, to your point, is segregated, that can actually serve as an input in our processing. But then after our processing at the front end, also build the partnerships with ingredient manufacturers, food processing manufacturers, CPG companies, you name it, to make sure that we engineer and design our solutions in such a way that they can be absorbed and deployed by them. Because if we can do that, then the multiplier starts to kick into gear. We might have a shot at the 50%.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Mark,
maybe I'll just quickly add to that. I think sometimes when we try to solve a problem directly, right, just trying to solve the problem, we might not get an answer. But if we zoom out, right, I think there's opportunities to connect the dots. Just to share, so our material, which is a plant-based material, if we have a one-to-one replacement with plastics, it's not going to beat it on price. Right? It's going to be 20 to 30% more expensive. But if we zoom out more, all right, the fertilizer, all right, there is value in fertilizer. on that ecosystem approach, I think that's real opportunity whereby we can change the system without incurring more cost. Okay, and also not to mention, all right, let's say for waste collectors who we are working with, the waste collectors, instead of passing their waste to the incineration, which they need to pay a gate fee, they could avoid paying that, bring it back to our factory, we'll digest that at a much cheaper cost. So I think, it's like we have to open up the business model, all right, not just going template style again, all right, and see really how we can close the loop.
Mark, I want to ask you the additional question of who do you think is going to be the first to get there? And you can't say the UK, because they've stalled. We know that. So who's going to be the first to get there? Who can achieve it?
I'm not going to name a country, but I'm going to create a state of mind, if you like. So food loss and waste is always a combination of production and consumption. And it depends on where you are as to which levers you have to pull the hardest. So for me, it's not just about the technological, the collaboration is, I agree with everything that's been said, it's absolutely critical that you take a systems view of this. You need to have, if you're trying to tackle food waste in a supply chain, you need to have the farmers, the pack house managers, the primary processors, the food manufacturers, the wholesalers and the retailers and the consumers all in a room to figure out what the problem is, where the hotspots are in the food value chain, and how to address them the most efficiently. And that doesn't happen very often. And our experience, well, my experience, not just in the UK, but in working with companies around the world, is that the fundamental thing you have to do is build trust. A food manufacturer or a farmer has to feel that what they say in a room is trusted and is constructive when they may be working with a retailer or a manufacturing customer. And likewise, a retailer or a manufacturing customer who's trying to understand how to reduce food waste on behalf of their customers, you and I, the general public, needs to feel safe in having those conversations with the rest of the value chain. So building trust, building that sense of a safe space, and this is why I think voluntary commitments work so well, because they create a pre-competitive safe space for all of the food chain to work within, to explore, to experiment, to really try some pretty crazy things sometimes. So that for me is the kind of the state of space. But because of the consumption thing, you really have to build awareness. So if I just give you one quick example, if you'll bear with me from the UK, when we did our original consumer insight, really trying to get under the skin of why households in the UK wasted food, we had a very high proportion of respondents to our survey work saying, we don't waste any food, we waste hardly any food at all. We asked then their permission to go back, and this was a pretty unpleasant task, and look through their household bins, their waste bins. And what that told us was that those people, and it was a 90% plus of the sample we were working with, so this was thousands of households, who said they didn't waste any food, or hardly any, were actually wasting over 90 kilos of food a year. And what that told us was wasting food in the home, and actually in industry to some respect, is an unconscious behaviour. And that, for me, is a really interesting thing, because as soon as you unlock the unconscious behaviour and make it a conscious behaviour, the light bulbs go on everywhere. In individual homes, in factories, in the retail space, in hospitality. As soon as awareness is raised and you understand the volume of food being wasted, people are automatically inclined. It's human nature. Food is the stuff of life. It's human nature to want to do something about it. And that is where we need programs like the CRC in Australia, like RAP in the UK, like Wageningen in the Netherlands, to bring these people together and to get that across. And so awareness for me, awareness raising, and that whole change in behaviour is critically important across the food chain, not just in households. And those are kind of some of the enablers I see, that you need to raise that awareness, you need to move from unconscious to conscious behaviour. And as soon as you do that, you have a coalition of the willing, people that want to do something about it and are prepared to work together and to build that trust.
Thank you, Mark. It's also worth saying that you can get there very quickly. If we look to a country like South Korea, they've almost eliminated food waste, but there's big fines, and they've banned all food waste from going to landfill, but they've dropped food waste levels by about 90% in a couple of years in doing that. Frankly, I can't see similar regulation being imposed in Australia, so we've got to do it a different way. I want to open the questions from the floor, and so you'll have a chance to come in. Now, I know there's a platform of doing that, but I believe that Beanstalk are to supply that. Have we got any questions? Yeah, just here. And sorry, there is a mic coming around behind you. And if you could just identify where you're from, that would be great. Thanks.
My name's Ashley. I'm from Sydney, and I have a snack food business. So I guess one thing that I'm particularly interested in is you've kind of got two challenges. You can, with portion control particularly, can kind of eliminate some waste, but then you're kind of putting out more plastic or packaging waste. So do you have any comments around that, around food waste versus more packaging?
If I can quickly say something there, this is playing out in the media as we speak at the moment. So there was a fresh produce group that released a report just last week around the role of packaging in reducing food waste, and we're doing a lot of media around that. So packaging has no doubt been demonised. We've got to reduce it, but there's a balance there that we have to achieve, because eliminating all packaging will increase food waste, and that has a much bigger environmental footprint. But I'll pass it over.
So you said snack food company, right? Okay. So one of the most interesting innovation studies I've ever done was in San Francisco, and it started in a craft brewery. And two guys ran it. One was from Stanford, one was from MIT, and they had a problem they wanted to solve. And the problem was they had a lot of spent grain that they used in the brewing process. And what they rapidly realized was that in the brewing process, a lot of the sugars were being taken out of the grain, which left them with a nice low glycemic opportunity. And they actually switched into manufacturing snack food bars using the spent grain. So they had wonderful things like stout and chocolate flavour, or honey nut and IPA flavour snack bars. They now actually make just as much money from the snack bars as they do from the beer. Their brand is called Regrained, if you want to look it up.
Yeah, I've seen it.
You've seen it.
Yeah.
And their marketing slogan is Eat Beer.
Yeah.
So that for me is a really great example of what to do with a food waste stream to create an entirely new product and new market for a healthy snack food.
And are they plastic wrapping that?
Yeah. It's really going amazingly well. In terms of the packaging question, just very quickly, there is this constant dynamic tension between media and consumer views around packaging, particularly plastic packaging right now. There's a huge amount of spotlight on it, and there is a need for more balance, I think. So if you look at, just look at food waste from a climate change perspective. So in the UK, we calculated the average tonne of food waste across all the types of food waste wasted in a tonne was 3 tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions per tonne of food waste. The average climate impact of the packaging that went with it was 1.2 tonnes. So there's far more embodied energy in the food and how it's produced and brought to market than there is in the packaging. And if you have a packaging system that is capable of recycling it, then you have a win-win. So you've just got to be really careful about getting that balance and not moving into the area of unintended consequences.
Maybe I can add, I'm not sure if Bio24 could be a solution, but maybe more so to share our journey or how we arrived at Bio24. I think what we realize is that in your restaurants, in your fast foods, right, at least for those that's using packaging, single-use food packaging, that's a real opportunity, right, for us to homogenize the waste, okay, whereby everything can be organic. So in this case, it's a controlled environment. Okay, everything that's being thrown into the bin, right, it is compatible to an organic digestion process. All right, so what we do is that we take it, all right, and digest it within 24 hours. So I think Of course, this requires a bit of a controlled environment. Okay, if it goes beyond that, it's like if you are really subjected to public waste collection system, right, and it doesn't have what we call the brown waste stream, okay, it's really a bit difficult. But I think that the process whereby we identify this is we ask ourselves, what is the activity flow, okay, when there's something that's related to dining in, okay, so and of course when your waste, the waste needs to be something that basically retrofit within the existing system. Your waste today, right, for the fast food needs to be collected, okay, by the waste collector anyway. Okay, so can we use the same amount of money, all right, to be collecting the organic waste as well? So I think being very sensitive to how the existing system is very important, and because I think it's like we've been very conditioned by the market. Okay, if we ask that there needs to be additional cost for collecting the waste, okay, for recycling purpose, it wouldn't work, at least for Singapore. Okay, I'll tell you 98% all right, of the cases it will not work. And I think we have to be empathetic to the businesses here, because they have certain budgets, all right, that's already set up. Okay, so can you expect KFC, all right, in order to adopt a recycling system to do renovations across tens of thousands of outlets, all right, how would that go with their franchisees? It wouldn't pan out. Okay, I mean, by just picturing that massive capex involved, it wouldn't pan out. So I think a bit more empathy on existing system that exists and how the solution can be retrofitted, and just being sensitized to the waste stream, just mapping it out. I think that could get some thoughts going.
That's an interesting comment. Having spent some time in Japan earlier this year, there, if you create it, you have to deal with it, and you have to manage it. And I think eventually that's the way we do need to go. So, other questions from the audience?
I just want to quickly, just one more comment. Just based on your last comment about the UK food waste and people saying they didn't have food waste, but they actually did. Is the association with meal scraps, or people just throwing out things that are in the fridge and not using?
It's actually, it's right the way across household behaviour and home economics. So it's about not planning before they go shopping, so they don't understand what they've got in the cupboard, the fridge, the freezer. It's about not shopping with a list, and sticking to it. That's the key thing. When you make a list, try and stick to it. It's about preparing the right amount of food, cooking the right amount of food, having the skills to combine leftover foods to create new meals. It's that whole suite of behaviours. And portion control is absolutely key for this as well. So for me, part of the solution to this is not just tackling food loss and waste. It's how do you actually link these food loss and waste and sustainability agendas with public health, nutrition as well. Bring it all together when you're thinking about how to strategize around this stuff.
Other questions?
Yeah, so I'm Donnie. I'm one of the founders of Why Waste, a food wasters app which we created 2 years ago. We found, obviously, the idea of reducing food waste has been in Europe for a number of years. You mentioned UK was very much ahead. And I know that Europe is, from what we're seeing, especially with Scandinavia, they're probably year 6, year 7, and Australia will be year 3. And we found in Australia... I
think that's generous, by the way.
I'm just being conservative, that's all. Well, what do you think, what's the main difference between, when you consider there's a lot of similarities between the culture? Is it the collective European environment that's changing countries like UK to be further ahead? And what can we do as a startup we can't really change a big environment, and we can't change consumers to accelerate this consumer behaviour from our end, and also taking notes from Singapore as well.
Take a quick shot at it because I was particularly interested in that last question. What can we do as a startup? And I'm operating in a similar environment, right? I mean, okay, San Francisco is pretty forward-leaning within the US, but it's still, by and large, the US kind of mindset that we're operating with. And I think the regulatory aspect of it is one thing, and being European, I know that facilitates and drives businesses in certain directions that in the US we're not experiencing. But at the same time, ultimately, if you want to run a business that's sustainable in all aspects, socially, environmentally, but also financially, the financial sustainability of the opportunity is obviously critical. So I think that what we just discussed briefly, looking at waste as a valuable resource and making sure that your value proposition is correct and that you can truly talk about the value creation and have that business case that Mark just referred to, but specific to your company, what is that business case? That'll unlock most of it, because a regulatory environment that's favorable without a business case behind it is still going to be a dead-end street financially. You're still going to be on the ropes. So that would be my answer to that question. But it's hard. It's really, really challenging.
Because I mean, Steve said that we can't achieve to be like South Korea the way they've done it, because that methodology just would not work in Australia.
Right.
People just wouldn't take it.
Yeah.
But I guess aside from government tariffs and fines and all those things, what have you learned from the European market in terms of shaping people's behaviour to actually want to make the change but not be forced to make the change?
So you can never force people to do something they don't want to do. That's the first thing you have to understand. I think for us, when we looked at it, so I have this wonderful fish diagram which basically shows that when we did our consumer insight and analysis around behaviour in the UK, we came across 74 interconnected behaviours that affect the way that people treat food and therefore the way it's wasted. So there is no one singular behaviour that causes people to waste food. It's a combination of behaviours. So then you need to understand, okay, so we were coming at it from wanting to launch a national campaign, Love Food, Hate Waste, which you now have in states and territories and a few cities here. You can't message through a consumer-facing campaign on 74 different types of message. So we had to distill it. And what it actually came down to was not using food in time and preparing and cooking too much. Those were the two core behaviours that we needed to address in households. And I would be very surprised if it's any different here. So it's about managing that inventory, understanding how to store food properly, and then understanding things like portion control.
The gentleman in the blue jumper.
Hi, my name's Cedric. I'm from Mildura. And the question is addressed possibly to Dr. Lapidge, and that is with regards to how does an organisation, an establishment like the CRC, which does amazing work, how does that get translated down to the individual? And having worked in the agri-business sector, I've seen CRCs in the agri-sector across a number of areas. How does that, I mean, at the end of the day, the research and the work that the CRC does, unless it's translated into action by us as individuals, the wonderful work that the CRC does is probably wasted. And the question is, where are we with regards to translating that wonderful work that the CRC has done into actionable stuff to change behaviour and to drive innovation and to get those linkages between those organisations, that communication of the entire spectrum from the consumer all the way through to the actual producer? How do we link those things together so that we're all working in the same direction and not pulling the ship in different directions?
Sure. That's a big question that every CRC tries to tackle. I will put a bit of background information there. Cooperative research centres are funded by the Department of Industry, and of course issues around food waste and food into landfill and so on is funded by the Department of Climate Change at the moment. And trying to bring those two departments together is going to be one of our big issues. Interestingly, in America, the three key departments dealing with food and the environment have all joined forces and signed a pact to work and co-fund work in this area. In terms of the Fight Food Waste CRC, we have a whole program titled Engage, which is all around consumer and industry behaviour. Engagement and extension is often an afterthought in many CRCs. They used to run for 7 years and they'd get to year 6 and think, how are we actually going to, tell people about our results? Where for us, it's been one of the first series of workshops we had were all around engagement, bringing industry on side. In terms of the Industry Connection Hub, one of our key programs, that has a reach through the help of organisations like Woolworths of over 10 million people. That's unheard of for a CRC, and that's something that we really need to work on. But we're also why the consumer behaviour change area is a smaller area to begin with, because it's not necessarily industry backed. It will be hopefully one of the biggest areas in the CRC, and we want to do the equivalent of a 10-year behaviour change program. So think slip, slop, slap for food waste, because unless we can deliver that and get household behaviour change, we can never achieve that target of 50% food waste reduction by 2030.
Stephen, we've got just 2 questions from the app that we've got time for, and then we have to close out. So the first question to the panel is, what percentage of produce is wasted during the selection process, and how can we change consumer perception on imperfect products still being good quality as an avenue to reduce waste?
Well, I'll start if I can. So the figure that we previously used was 25% of fruit and vegetables are graded out. And in some crops, like potatoes, that's up to 45% in premium potatoes are all graded out. And a lot of those go to zero use. So they go to animal feed or compost. And so what our CRC is about is creating value out of them. CSIRO recently did a very extensive survey of the Australian horticulture industry. It's on their website. And again, it comes in at about 26, 28% across the board. So it's huge waste. The issue is that so there are programs to like Odd Bunch with Woolworths to help get those second fruit and vegetables into the marketplace. I can tell you though, it's not always supported by the growers themselves, because it takes away from their premium pricing. So again, we need to find the balance there, and often they are left on the shelf, which creates food waste. So again, we need to find that balance. Not sure whether you guys have anything else to add to that.
No? Okay, so the final question. The panel has spoken highly of the efforts made in South Korea and through the government intervention, but that would never happen here in Australia. Why is the lack of government intervention not being questioned if its impacts are so successful?
Maybe someone else should handle that one, not the Australian in the room.
Okay, but I guess I cannot, to some extent, speak on behalf of the authorities, but perhaps if I can offer a viewpoint, when I spoke to my team 2 years ago, I think one constraint that we set for ourselves is not to count on the government. All right, we can crack this. Okay, so in a way, let me talk you through the pain points that we experience, right? I think the first thing to look out for, all right, with societal changes, with there's always something new on the market. Look for the pain points. Okay, this is a great opportunity to optimize the whole process flow. So, for example, waste collectors. What are the pain points of waste collectors? I think waste collectors are always, it's a very dirty business, literally, and of course is you're on the downstream side of receiving waste. Okay, so whatever waste that's being thrown to you, you have to take it. You cannot say that, hey, look, you're not expecting that, you're not separating out the waste, and hence I'm not taking it. Are you losing your revenue because of that? Are you willing to risk that? So, it's like what we have done in order to close the loop is that we are working with Deloitte with a zero waste certification. So, for example, if there are certain F&B that, for some reasons has violated, they're thrown in plastics into the waste, okay, what we can do is to go back to them and say, look, all right, you're possibly in violation of our contract, right? We could revoke your zero waste certification. So this kind of keeps them in check. Okay, so, and I think the other opportunity for the waste collectors is that they are also collecting organic waste. So there's this waste collector locally in Singapore that basically came to us and say, hey, it's very interesting that you guys can take organic waste. I collect 2 tons of dried leaves a day. Can you take it? Sure, why not? Okay, so instead of paying the incineration $72, per ton of waste, bring it back to our factory, right? We process it cheaper. So I think to some extent it is, we just have to look hard enough. There's always pain points here and there. There are new opportunities, there are new technologies. It is how you connect the dots and basically have a system that can run without policy help.
Fantastic, Stephen.
Just add quickly to that, the key reason the Australian government won't do that is it believes in free market economics and not regulation, and why the current government is in, that will remain the case. We will innovate our way out of this. They won't regulate our way out of this. I'm not sure who from the government's in the room, but hopefully that somewhat captures their stance. Certainly that's when I started talking about food waste to the various federal departments, that's the answer I always got. We will innovate our way out of this. So.
Can I make a quick build on that? I think it's an awesome point about innovation and the short-termism of government, right? And I think that part of the answer might actually not be in the role of government, but the role of finance, money, and the short-termism thereof, right? Finance looks at quarterly earnings reports. Government looks at election cycles every 4 years. That's short-term, both of them, in the context of the problems that we're trying to solve. So the long-termism is important. We're currently fundraising, and I always say, I need patient people with I need impatient people with patient capital, right? Impatient as in this shit needs to be solved for. Let's get on with it. But patient capital because it's going to take a while. And I see a lot of movement in that space. I see a lot of family offices, the large ones, but I also see the big ones like BlackRock and what have you, just changing their mindset. And I think that the nature of invested capital in the next 5 to 10 years is going to change, maybe not from short to long, but from short to longer. And I think in combination with more kind of facilitating government, there will be a lot of tailwinds coming our way.
Okay. A great way to finish. Please give it up for Stephen and his panel today.